At the lodge reunion, my father raised his glass and said, "Let's toast to the kid who still chases butterflies." My sister laughed until I unzipped my vest and revealed the High Ridge logo. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the mountain lodge was the smell of cedar and expensive whiskey. It hadn't changed in 3 years, but I had. I stood there, camera bag slung over my shoulder, trying not to think about the last time I'd been here. The jokes about me playing in the woods, while everyone else did real work. My name is Evan. I'm 28, a wildlife photographer, and the black sheep of this family. Evan, well, look who decided to crawl out of the forest. My older brother, Nathan, stood by the fireplace, glass of bourbon in hand, wearing that same tailored suit he always packed for these casual family gatherings. His tone was smooth, but the bite underneath was sharp enough to draw blood. "Hi, Nathan," I said, forcing a smile. "Nice to see you too. Thought you'd be too busy chasing squirrels with a camera," he added with a smirk. A few cousins chuckled. My father, Greg, barely looked up from his seat at the head of the room, where he was reading something on his phone. His silence was worse than the laughter. I dropped my bag by the wall and walked further inside. I made time. It's been a while. 3 years, my cousin Emily said, sipping white wine like she was narrating a court case. "You just disappeared. Guess the mountains don't get cell service?" The way she said it made it clear she thought I'd been sulking somewhere, failing at life. "Something like that," I replied, my voice steady. My mother offered me a polite smile from across the room, the kind that felt more like an obligation than warmth. "Evan, there's still some food left in the kitchen. Help yourself." I nodded and walked toward the long wooden table set up with the usual spread, artisanal cheeses, fruit platters, and desserts with names I couldn't pronounce. I remembered being a kid at this same lodge, sneaking candy bars because my father said real success meant eating like an adult. That memory burned like a slow ember in my chest. Nathan followed me to the table, his voice dropping low. "So, you back because you ran out of money? Or is this one of those finding yourself phases?" I looked up at him, smiling faintly. "Neither." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Must be nice to live off your little passion projects. Some of us don't have that luxury." I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself some coffee and watched the reflection of the fire flicker on the surface of the cup. I wasn't here to trade insults. Not yet. When everyone gathered for the evening ritual, a toast to the accomplishments of the year, I sat quietly at the far end of the table. Nathan bragged about his new promotion at his law firm. Emily shared how her startup had landed another round of funding. My father nodded, offering approval in small doses. When it came to me, he didn't even ask. The room buzzed with stories of deals closed and investments made. I sipped my coffee, smiling like I didn't care. Inside, though, I was listening, storing every word like ammunition. No one knew why I'd really come back. Not yet. Dinner stretched on like an endurance test. The long pine table was lit by candles, their soft glow doing little to ease the tension that came from being back in this room with these people. My father, Greg, sat at the head, as always, his posture rigid, the unspoken reminder that he was the patriarch, the benchmark no one could quite reach, except maybe Nathan. Plates clinked as dessert was served. My mother had made her famous pecan pie, but even that couldn't distract me from the conversation swirling around me. Nathan leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "So, Evan," he said casually, like he'd just remembered I was there. "What exactly is it you do again? Take pictures of deer and sell them at farmers markets? Or is it bears now? I lose track." He smirked, and a ripple of laughter moved down the table. I smiled faintly, ignoring the jab. "Wildlife photography, mostly through contracts and conservation projects. It's been good." Emily chimed in, her tone syrupy sweet. "That's cute. Meanwhile, we've been real busy. My company just closed a $3 million funding round. It's intense, but, real work." Greg chuckled quietly at that. "Real work," he repeated, as if the words were meant for me. I let their comments roll off. I wasn't here to defend myself anymore. I'd spent too many years trying to explain my choices to people who would never understand them. When the plates were cleared and glasses refilled, Greg stood for his annual toast. He tapped his glass with a silver knife, and the chatter stopped. "Another great year for this family," he began, his voice deep and steady. "Nathan with his promotion to senior partner. Emily with her startup success. Even your cousin Lucas just bought his second rental property." His gaze slid to me, the pause deliberate. "And then there's Evan." The silence was sharp. I felt the eyes of every person at the table shift toward me. Greg's smile didn't reach his eyes. Evan, who's still out there with his camera, living some bohemian dream. I guess someone has to keep the starving artist stereotype alive. A few people chuckled nervously. He raised his glass. "Here's to real achievements, and to hoping everyone finds their way eventually." The toast stung more than I wanted to admit. The younger version of me might have stared at his plate, hoping the moment would pass. But tonight, something was different. I laughed. It wasn't loud or bitter, just a quiet, unexpected laugh that made a few heads turn. Greg's brow furrowed. Something funny, Evan? I set my glass down, meeting his gaze with a calmness I hadn't felt before. I was just thinking how predictable this is, I said softly. Same speech, different year. The room went still. I leaned back, unzipping my jacket just enough for the insignia on my shirt to show. A simple, embroidered mountain peak with the letters HRC, High Ridge Conservatory. Emily's wine glass froze midair. Is that, she started, her voice faltering. Yes, I said, smiling. The largest privately funded environmental nonprofit in the state. A murmur rippled through the table. Greg narrowed his eyes, like he was trying to figure out whether I was bluffing. I didn't just take pictures this year. I continued. I joined High Ridge. Actually, I do more than just work there. I let that hang in the air, my tone casual, almost playful. For the first time all evening, no one had anything to say. The silence around the table stretched long enough for me to hear the faint crackle of the fireplace. My father's hand hovered over his wine glass, but he didn't drink. Nathan was the first to break. High Ridge, he said, like he was testing the name for authenticity. Wait, are you telling us you work there? His tone was skeptical, as if I'd claimed to have joined NASA overnight. Not exactly, I said, sliding my jacket off and draping it over my chair. The insignia of High Ridge Conservatory was stitched clearly on the breast of my button-down. I own it. The words landed like a rock dropped into still water. Emily blinked. Lucas, who had been quietly scrolling through his phone moments earlier, suddenly sat straighter. You what? Emily asked, her voice tight. I bought it, I said evenly. 2 years ago, I started building a conservation tech platform that caught some attention. We merged with High Ridge last year. I've been running it since. I took a sip of water, letting the information sink in. It's been busy. Nathan scoffed. That's impossible. High Ridge is huge. They have, what, over 100 employees? It's not something you just buy. I met his stare. It wasn't easy. I spent 3 years working on something that mattered, instead of sitting around trying to impress anyone here. Emily frowned. You're joking, right? You don't even what? I asked, my tone still calm. Don't wear a suit every day? Don't post my accomplishments on LinkedIn for likes? Doesn't mean I haven't been working. Greg's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to me talking like this. This is a nice little story, he said, voice dripping with skepticism. But forgive me if I need proof before I start believing my son suddenly owns a multi-million-dollar organization. I smiled faintly. Of course. I reached into my bag and pulled out a leather folder. Inside was a glossy investor report, ownership documents, and a printout of our latest audit results, all stamped and signed. I slid it across the table toward him. Greg opened the folder with a deliberate slowness, scanning the first page. His brow furrowed, then deepened as he flipped to the next. He didn't say anything, but I caught the way his jaw tightened. Wait, Emily said suddenly, her voice rising. You're telling me that you own High Ridge? As in, the High Ridge Conservatory where I've been applying for consulting work? The one where... She stopped herself. I tilted my head. Yes, you applied, didn't you? I saw your resume come across my desk. It's a nice one. Polished, even. But we went with someone else. Her face turned crimson. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, I said. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. My department, we... He hesitated, glancing at Greg. We do contracting work for High Ridge. Still do, I confirmed. For now. The table erupted in whispers and half-started sentences. Nathan leaned forward, his smirk finally faltering. You really expect us to believe you built something like that on your own? You're just a photographer. I looked at him, my voice soft but unyielding. I'm a photographer who built a platform that uses satellite imaging and drone mapping to track wildlife migration. I licensed it to 3 national parks, then rolled the revenue into buying High Ridge when they were about to go under. I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding it from the ground up. Greg's hand was still on the folder, his knuckles white. He looked up, eyes sharp. Even if that's true, it doesn't change who you are. I smiled. I think it changes a lot more than you realize. Greg closed the folder slowly, as if he needed extra time to process what he'd just read. He set it down in front of him, his lips pressed into a hard line. The room had gone uncomfortably quiet, and the air felt heavy with tension. Emily broke first. So what? You're just going to sit there and act like this gives you the right to lecture us? I leaned back in my chair, unbothered. I don't need to lecture anyone. I just need to make sure certain things are handled correctly from here on out. Nathan laughed sharply. What's that supposed to mean? I reached into my bag again and pulled out a plain, unmarked envelope. I placed it gently in the middle of the table, just loud enough to make everyone stop talking. Greg eyed it like it was a live grenade. What is that? Consider it a courtesy, I said. A memo about what's coming. Emily crossed her arms, defensive. What is this, some kind of stunt? No, I said evenly. Inside that envelope are performance audits, department transition plans, and a few pending investigations. Some of them might sound familiar to you. I glanced at Emily, then Lucas. They involve certain staff members who are connected to people in this room. Lucas's face paled. Wait, what do you mean investigations? I looked directly at him. I mean, there's been a lot of questionable hiring practices and performance issues. Falsified credentials. Expenses that don't match the books. Favoritism so obvious it's practically policy. I let the words settle like dust. Nathan shook his head, trying to laugh it off. This is ridiculous. You're seriously sitting here accusing us? We've been part of that organization way longer than you've even known it existed. Exactly, I said quietly. And that's the problem. It's been run like a private club instead of what it's meant to be, an environmental nonprofit. I'm fixing that. Emily's face twisted in panic. You can't just fire people because you don't like them. I'm not firing anyone because I don't like them, I said, my tone sharper now. I'm holding everyone to the same standards. Something this family has never believed in. Greg slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. Enough of this self-righteous crap. You think because you lucked into some money, you can come in here and tear apart everything we've built? I stared at him, my voice calm but firm. You didn't build High Ridge. You used it as a playground for your friends and a way to keep power in the family. That's over now. Starting next week, every department goes through an independent review. No more special treatment. Emily stood up, her chair scraping the floor. You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare. I smiled faintly. Open the envelope. She hesitated, then snatched it up and tore it open. As she scanned the papers inside, her face drained of color. This is insane. Don't bother, I said. Those are already filed with the board and the audit committee. What you're holding is just a copy. Lucas leaned forward, his voice strained. You can't just push us out. We're family. Exactly, I said, standing now. You're family. And you've treated me like dirt for years. But this isn't about revenge. It's about cleaning up the mess you left behind. Greg's voice was low, almost a growl. You walk out of here now, don't bother coming back. I looked around the table, at the shocked faces, the half-eaten pie, the room where I'd spent my childhood being belittled. I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I wasn't planning to. With that, I walked out, the echo of my steps cutting through the heavy silence. By the next morning, my phone looked like a war zone. 30 missed calls, countless texts, and one particularly long voicemail from Emily that sounded more like a threat than a plea. I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how they'd all react, scrambling, panicking, trying to control the damage. I sat on the deck of my small cabin overlooking the ridge, sipping black coffee while my phone buzzed relentlessly. The chaos inside their world had nothing to do with mine anymore. By 10 a.m., I got the first email from my operations team. Subject: implementation of new personnel policies underway. Status: department heads notified. Audit scheduled. I smiled. The machine was already running. I had a strong executive team. People I'd handpicked because they cared about results, not bloodlines. Nathan texted next. We need to talk. You can't just steamroll people like this. Dad is furious. Fix this before it gets ugly. I let the message sit unread. At 11:30, I got a string of desperate texts from Lucas. Evan, please, just call me. I didn't know anything about the credentials issue. I swear. Can we work something out? There was a time I would have felt bad for him. For all of them. Really. But not anymore. They had mocked me for years, treated my work like a hobby while using every ounce of privilege they could to get ahead. Now, for the first time, the roles were reversed. Around noon, my father made his move. He didn't bother with subtlety. Evan, this is Greg. If you think you can strong-arm this family, you're wrong. I'm talking to our lawyer. There will be consequences for this. I stared at his message for a long moment, then flagged it for my legal team to review. If he wanted a fight, I'd give him one, but on paper, with signatures and audits, the kind of fight he couldn't win by shouting. By mid-afternoon, my assistant forwarded me the first resignation letter from a senior staff member, someone who'd been coasting under Greg's protection for years. 2 more resignations came in before dinner. Each one felt like a door closing on the old way things had been run. At around 4 p.m., Emily called again. I finally picked up. You're destroying everything, she snapped before I could even say hello. I'm fixing everything, I replied. You don't get it, do you? Dad's furious, Lucas is panicking, and she cut herself off. Look, we can figure this out if you just. I'm not negotiating with you, I said calmly. This isn't personal. It's business. Something you've all claimed to understand better than me. You're unbelievable, she spat. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I paused. No, Emily. I'm just not afraid of you anymore. Then I ended the call. That night, I sat at my laptop and reviewed the updated organizational chart. A leaner, cleaner structure was already taking shape. Every name tied to nepotism or underperformance was under review. For years, they had built walls to keep me out of their world. Now, I was rebuilding their world without them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like I had finally stepped out of a shadow I'd been living in my entire life. 3 days passed without a word from my father. Not a text, not an email, not even one of his passive-aggressive family comes first speeches. I thought maybe he was stewing in silence, waiting for me to cave. But I wasn't the same kid who used to flinch under his stare. The call came on the 4th evening. I was cleaning my camera gear when my phone lit up with his name, Greg. For a second, I considered letting it ring out. Instead, I answered, holding the phone to my ear without saying a word. Evan, he said. His voice wasn't angry, not exactly. It was controlled, cautious. We need to talk. I figured this was coming, I replied. A pause. I could hear the faint sound of him exhaling, like he was trying to find the right tone. I think you've made your point. The whole family is rattled. Maybe that's enough now. I leaned back in my chair. Enough for you, maybe. Son, he began, his voice dipping into that practiced paternal tone that used to work on me. I know we've had our differences, but this power play, what's the endgame here? You think you're going to scare everyone into respecting you? No, I said quietly. I stopped caring about that a long time ago. There was silence on the line. Then, a shift in his tone, softer, but not sincere. Listen, Evan, I've been in business long enough to know that burning bridges never works out. If you want a seat at the table, fine. We can make room for you. I laughed, not out of humor, but because of how predictable it all was. I'm not asking for a seat at your table, Dad. I built my own. That landed harder than I expected. I could hear him take a breath, sharp and shallow. You think this is strength? Cutting us off? Humiliating your own family? I think strength is not letting people walk over you just because they share your last name, I said. Another pause. When he spoke again, there was a hint of something I rarely heard from him. Not regret, but fear. Evan, be smart about this. If you push too far, there's no coming back. You understand that, don't you? I understand, I said, and I'm fine with it. He was quiet for a long moment. There's still a place for you here, he tried again, almost as an afterthought. But if you keep tearing down what I've built, what you've built, I cut in, my voice firm. High Ridge isn't yours anymore, and neither am I. The line went silent. I thought he'd hang up, but instead, he said, so that's it? There's no place for me in your new empire? I didn't hesitate. No, Dad, there isn't. I hung up first. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for shutting him out. I felt certain. The fallout was quick. Within a week, the last of my so-called family ties to High Ridge were severed. The resignations kept rolling in, some by choice, others because my audits had uncovered things too ugly to ignore. Nepotism, ghost payroll entries, travel reimbursements for vacations disguised as research trips. The list was endless. I didn't gloat. I just signed the necessary terminations and handed everything over to my executive team. The organization was cleaner with every step, lighter in ways it had never been before. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. Not an email or a text, a real handwritten letter, folded neatly into an ivory envelope. The return address was my mother's. I sat at my kitchen table, holding it for a while before I opened it. Her handwriting hadn't changed, elegant, careful, like every word had been rehearsed. Evan, I know I've been silent. Maybe I don't deserve to say anything at all after how he treated you. I can't pretend I didn't know. I saw how your father talked to you. I saw how he laughed when you tried to share your work. I didn't stop it, and I should have. This letter isn't an excuse. I don't even know if you'll read this. I just want you to know that I see it now. I see you, Mom. I read it twice. There was no apology, not in the full sense, but something about it hit me harder than I expected. For years, I told myself I didn't care what they thought, but here I was, sitting at my kitchen table with a lump in my throat over a few lines of ink. I didn't write back. I didn't know how. Maybe I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on what was in front of me. High Ridge was changing fast. We'd implemented a merit-based structure that rewarded real results, not family nameplates. New project proposals were rolling in from conservation groups that had previously avoided us. For the first time, I felt like the work we were doing mattered, not as a statement against my family, but as something bigger than all of us. Emily sent one final text that week. You'll regret this. Families don't forget. I stared at it for a moment before deleting it. Maybe she was right. Maybe part of me would always feel that sting of being the outsider. But it didn't matter anymore. The last formal separation happened on a rainy Thursday. My legal team finalized the removal of my father and two cousins from any consulting roles within High Ridge. The moment the paperwork came through, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not joy, just peace. Later that night, I walked out onto my cabin's porch, the rain tapping gently against the roof. I thought about everything that had led me here, all the years of being the silent one at the table, the easy target for their jokes. And now, the silence was mine. I didn't need their approval anymore. Months passed like chapters closing in a book I no longer needed to reread. High Ridge thrived under its new structure, merit-based roles, transparent budgeting, and community partnerships that actually did what they promised. Every week brought another small victory, a successful wildlife relocation, a grant for a preservation project, a headline that spoke my name without mockery. For the first time in my life, I was known not as Greg's son or the odd photographer, but as Evan, the man who rebuilt High Ridge from the ground up. I didn't hear much from my family anymore. Occasionally, I'd see Nathan's name in the news, attached to some law firm achievement. Emily posted her usual curated updates on social media, all forced smiles and glassy-eyed toasts at rooftop bars. I scrolled past without feeling anything. Then, one afternoon, an envelope showed up in my mailbox, a formal invitation to the next annual family gathering at the Mountain Lodge. The same lodge where I'd been belittled for years, where I had silently taken my father's words like they were scripture. I didn't hesitate. I tossed the envelope into the recycling bin. But a week before their event, I made a quiet call to the lodge. I arranged for a sizable anonymous donation to cover renovations for their community programs, something that would make headlines. Something they would know came from me, even if I never said it out loud. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making my mark in a way that couldn't be erased or ignored. The day of the gathering, I woke up early and hiked up to a ridge overlooking the valley. The air was cool, the forest alive with the quiet sounds of nature. I sat with my camera and watched the sunrise, feeling no urge to be anywhere else. Later that evening, a photo of the lodge popped up on social media, my cousins and siblings all dressed in their finest, smiling for the camera. For a moment, I stared at the image, expecting the old sting of exclusion. But it never came. Instead, I felt something lighter. I didn't need their table, their applause, or their approval. I'd built my own legacy, one defined not by their narrow version of success, but by my own terms. Before bed, I sent an email to my team about the next project we were funding, a wildlife corridor initiative that would take us into uncharted territory. My name would be on it, not as a desperate attempt to prove myself, but as a leader who had earned respect. That night, as I stood on my porch, the cool wind brushing against my face, I realized something. They might never understand who I've become, but they didn't need to. The mark I'd left, on High Ridge, on the work we were doing, was permanent. And that was enough.